Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens.
Diddy may have been acquitted of some pretty big charges at his criminal trial, but he still was convicted of 2. So what's next for him in terms of sentencing, his finances, facing a wave of lawsuits, including a brand new one from a former exotic dancer who claims Diddy drugged and assaulted him, caused him to lose teeth and have to get gastric surgery? We're going to talk.
Diddy just completely lost it. And this time, it wasn't because of a guilty verdict. In a twist nobody saw coming, the courtroom was hit with a shocker. Diddy was found not guilty on some of the major charges.
Sex trafficking charges that he was facing. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited, to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that, considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in a dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. That. Right. They don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event. So he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If they had called, let's say, Christina Courtroom, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony.
And for a brief second, it looked like he was about to walk out a free man. You could feel the tension lift. His team started celebrating. Smiles broke out. But then, out of nowhere, the judge dropped a hammer that froze the entire room. Bail? Denied. Diddy wasn't going anywhere. The doors weren't opening. And that's when he absolutely exploded. He couldn't believe it. He started yelling, pacing, slamming the table. His own lawyers couldn't calm him down. The same courtroom that had just given him a taste of hope A glimpse of freedom had snatched it away in an instant. The judge's voice was clear and cold. Despite the acquittal on these charges, the court finds that the remaining circumstances, allegations, and risk factors are too serious to grant bail. Just like that, Diddy was back in his seat, fuming, sweating, helpless. The empire that once made him invincible now couldn't buy him one step outside that courtroom. And here's the part that really shook people. The judge said the not guilty ruling didn't erase the danger.
Whether she was a willing participant or not, but if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane, or you didn't call in Amia, or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play, Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, but do you feel that the prosecution could have won this case if they structured it differently, if they called different witnesses?
That's a great question, and that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, would the impact upon the jury and would the result have been different. The fundamental problem, I think, is that this was kind of always a round peg in a square hole. The arson, that domestic violence video that we all watched, that's horrific. All of that should have been prosecuted as state crimes in Los Angeles. That as a fundamental, starting point.
Well, they couldn't
So
do it now. It
basically,
was time barred.
No, of course, the statute is run on everything.
Yep.
But that would have been, he would have been prosecuted for exactly what he did instead of predicate acts into a RICO theory. Now, RICO, as we know, was designed for essentially mafia organization, for organized crime. And the idea is simply because there's a legitimate business, like in The Godfather, they had a legitimate olive oil importing business, and that was but it was still a criminal enterprise. The real thing was the mafia. The real thing was the organized crime surrounding the Corleone family, to use an example that everybody can probably relate to. So simply because their olive oil importing business was legitimate, that's not a defense to a RICO thing. That's the current state of the law. What they did here is they took a business that was always legitimate, Bad Boy Records, that was always and the purpose is to make music and make money. Everything surrounded that. And the defense argument, which they obviously argued very effectively, was that is not a criminal enterprise. So the very first element of RICO has always been problematic from the very beginning. You and I talked about that 2 months ago when this whole thing started. And and the jury, this was a sober jury that the questions were serious and direct. And, they sent that note out regarding juror 25 right at the very beginning saying, hey, this guy's not deliberating. And so this was a serious group. And the Mann Act, they did convict on that. So they were, by the fact that that it was unanimous, meant that they were getting along. Federal juries tend to be, in California anyway, we have, they draw our state juries off the DMV database. That's how you get jury duty, is from the DMV. Federally, it's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote. And you tend to get a more serious class of juror.
That even though the jury cleared him of certain charges, the evidence presented, the testimony, the patterns, the witnesses, still painted a disturbing picture. The prosecution leaned in. They weren't done. And the judge agreed. This wasn't a victory. It was a warning. For Diddy, this was worse than a guilty verdict, because it gave him just enough hope to taste freedom before slamming the cell door in his face. He thought the worst was behind him. He thought he'd beat the biggest part. But the court made it crystal clear. The danger hasn't passed. There are still serious charges pending, still mountains of evidence that haven't been dismissed, and still a very real possibility that his next day in court will be even worse than the last. As soon as news broke, the internet exploded. People didn't know what to feel. One moment they were stunned that Diddy had skated on major charges. And the next, they were watching his meltdown as the judge refused to let him walk. Social media split in two. Some said this proved the system was still broken.
That he got in trouble for, that Diddy got in trouble for in jail, was using other inmates' calling number. Remember that? So he was calling witnesses in the case from jail using other inmates. That was a direct affront to that judge. That was remember, we had all those those attempts at bail that were denied at the very beginning of the case, one after another after another. This judge, and it's the same judge who's going to sentence him, denied that over and over again. And you and I, again, in another conversation we had on your show, we both said he is screwed now, that he's got no chance because he's violating the rules of the court while in jail. So if he's disobeying the rules of the jail and the directive of the court while he's in custody, how can he be expected to actually follow the terms of a bail agreement when he's out of custody?
Right, right.
And I think that chicken is coming home to roost again. I mean, I think that's what happened yesterday afternoon. That any judge who has a criminal defendant who behaves like that, that is an affront to the court itself. It's disrespectful to the court. And it's almost like he couldn't get out of his own way there at the beginning. But he had an excellent defense team.
He does. So assuming for a moment, whenever the sentencing hearing happens, right? Let's say it happens in a month from now. Let's say it has October 3rd. The question is, what's his sentence? As we mentioned, the prosecution in a filing from yesterday talked about the guidelines range being 51 to 63 months. Now, this is before a pre-sentencing investigation and report. Now, the defense, right, they want 21 months. He's already served almost 10. Talk to us about what you're thinking here, because there is no minimum. The maximum's 10. If the judge were to combine it together, like you said, 20 years, feels highly unlikely that would happen. As we're talking, what is a pre-sentencing report investigation? How would it affect this? What do you think the judge is going to do? There's so many different factors to consider here, and it's not like a murder case when it's like, okay, we know what's going to happen. It's like life in prison without the possibility of parole. It's a given. There's room here. What do you think the judge is going to do?
So in federal court, this is actually very interesting. They rely very heavily on those pre-sentencing investigations. So essentially what will happen is there'll be a federal probation officer, and they do these for almost every case, where they will do their own investigation, where they'll talk to family members, they'll talk to employers, they'll talk to neighbors, and they will make a recommendation to the court as to suitability for release, suitability for time. And that's something that federal judges traditionally really adhere to. They tend to put a lot of weight on those, far more than they do in state court. The probation department can make a recommendation, but the DA will certainly have more ability, most of the time, to talk a judge in or out of a sentencing recommendation from the probation department. Federal court is different. They really put a lot of weight on those. So that's something that I think is going to be very interesting. And a lot of that will come down to what the individuals involved in that investigation, even though it shouldn't.
That power protects power. Others said it showed the system still has teeth. That just because someone beats a charge doesn't mean they're innocent, and it doesn't mean they're safe. And Diddy? He's spiraling. Inside sources say he's blaming everyone. The judge, his legal team, the media, even former friends who stayed silent. He's convinced someone sabotaged him. But the truth is, he couldn't talk his way out of this one. The court saw through the performance, the outbursts, the control. They saw a man who's been used to getting his way. And they said, not this time. This isn't just about bail. This is about momentum. Because if Diddy had walked out that day, even after the remaining charges, it would have sent a message that he was still untouchable. But now the narrative's flipped. Now he's just another defendant sitting in holding, waiting for the next wave to hit. And from what insiders are saying, the next wave is already coming. More witnesses, more filings, more sealed evidence about to be unsealed. The kind of stuff that might make the first trial look tame in comparison. And let's talk about that not guilty ruling. Yes, it caught people off guard, but it wasn't an acquittal on everything. It was strategic, carefully worded. Specific charges didn't stick. But others? They're still alive. And prosecutors are already regrouping, already pushing to fast-track the next phase. Because they know what's at stake. And they know...
Also clarifying what this case is about, right? You just need to find that one time. That was important, right?
Yeah, that was definitely really important, Jesse. And it was something that was surprising to me because if you think back to just the summary witnesses and the flight summary charts, according to the government, there are several alleged instances of sex trafficking. But again, to your point, Jesse, Christy Slavic really kind of telling the jury you really only need to find one instance of sex trafficking to find the defendant guilty. But as it pertains to Jane, Christy Slavic really kind of took it piece by piece by piece, kind of really laying out the different stages of how this turned out to be kind of alleged sex trafficking. And so the first stage was the drugs, the outfits, putting pornography on together. The second stage being the fantasy talk, and that was the fantasy talk as it comes to Sean Combs fantasizing about Jane doing things with other men in front of him. And so Christy Slavic even said during her closing argument that Jane thought it was going to be just this one-time thing, that it was going to be the first hotel night, that would be it. But then it just kind of set forth their entire relationship, and that within a few months of just doing these hotel nights, she wanted them to stop. But even the third stage, she had pointed out, was using payments of Jane's rent as leverage. And so there were just several instances of sex trafficking that they particularly talked about. And again, that being the prosecution, where they point to specific instances such as the sobriety party that happened in October of 2023, where Jane tried to go do a hotel night without using drugs. And then she ended up throwing up between escort number 2 and escort number 3. And then, of course, one of the big things that the prosecution really talked about was a clear point of sex trafficking in their eyes was what had happened on June 18th, June 19th of 2024. So just last year, or it's just been a year now, but in terms of when Sean Combs was over at Jane's residence, there was a physical altercation, and then she was allegedly forced to do a hotel night at her home with another escort. And this was after she was beaten, after she was kicked and dragged, and other instances. And so as far as it comes to count 4, those were just the big points that the prosecution alleged were sex trafficking. Obviously, there was a lot more that they wanted to talk about, but in terms of just even kind of the sexually explicit videos of the hotel nights / the freak offs, the Wild King nights, whatever you want to call them. I remember there was a point kind of as we were wrapping up the case overall that the defense was really kind of showing the jury these sexually explicit videos. However, the prosecution is saying that Jane might have been on this liquid Molly, and or / MDMA that was kind of liquefied, or it was mixed in with water, and then it was like kind of squirted into her mouth, and that's why she may have sounded enthusiastic, or it might have appeared that she was consensual in these particular sexually explicit videos. But again, the government kind of pointing out that this was a clear instance of Jane being under the influence of drugs, and maybe that's why she appeared to be consenting or enthusiastic as far as just her demeanor on these sexually explicit videos that, of course, we in the gallery didn't see. Only the jury has seen it, and the parties and the witness and the defendant, of course,
and there was a number of text messages from Jane where she is showing her reluctance to engaging in this, whether she was upset, she was jealous, whether she was upset how she was being treated. It was clear from messages that she took issue with these nights. And look, with Cassie, if you talk about whether or not there are clear-cut examples more than any others of sex trafficking, I've said it before, I'll say it again, the 2016 Intercontinental Hotel attack video, right? Because she claims that she was leaving a freak.
Diddy knows it too. That's why he lost it. That's why he exploded in court. Because he's not used to being told no. He's not used to being powerless. But that's exactly what he is now. No stage. No microphone, no cameras, no security to sweep the drama away. Just cold walls, locked doors, and a legal team scrambling to stop the bleeding. And the fallout? It's massive. Brands are bailing, collaborators are distancing, projects are vanishing. His name is getting pulled from credits, events, festivals. Even people who once called him a mentor are starting to call him a liability. He's radioactive, not because he was found guilty, but because he wasn't found innocent. That's the difference. And people see it. The industry is watching closely, because this moment isn't just about Diddy. It's about the idea that no one is above consequences anymore. It's about the fact that influence, money, and nostalgia can't erase the truth. And now that the judge has made it clear that Diddy still poses a threat, that freedom is a privilege he no longer has, others are taking notes. You know what else is happening? Whispers. From people who saw the ruling and felt something shift. People who were scared to come forward before. People who thought he'd never face real consequences. Now they're watching him sit in that courtroom, stripped of the power he once held over them. And they're ready to talk. The silence is breaking. The fear is fading. And if the floodgates open, it's not just a scandal anymore. It's a reckoning. Diddy's lawyers can try to spin it. They can issue statements, talk about appeal strategies, accuse the court of bias. But the visuals speak louder than the words. The meltdown in court. The bail denied. The headlines screaming, the mugshot getting prepped, the legacy collapsing, and the world watching it happen in real time. So let's be clear. This is far from over. Diddy isn't walking away. He isn't jetting off to some villa. He's not posting cryptic captions from a beach somewhere. He's locked in this case, and the walls are closing in. Because the truth is out, and no amount of denial can put it back. Let us know what you think. Was the judge right to deny bail? Did the court make the right call? Is this justice or just the beginning of something even bigger? One thing's certain. Diddy thought the fight was ending. But it turns out the real war is just beginning. And this time the system is ready to strike back. Ask ChatGPT.